Hey everyone, I am late here on a Friday evening. I've had a really hectic week. Actually, all of us at Stolen Stitches have just had a really busy, intense week this week and last week. And so I kind of feel like the blog is a little bit of an unwind, regroup, and just allowing myself to be a little bit more pensive and thinking into things a bit more. Maybe it might give you a bit more of an insight into me as a designer and why I do what I do as well. So as well as having a couple of busy weeks, we had our holidays a few weeks ago. First holiday in several years, which is the same for most people, I think, because courtesy of the pandemic and family deaths, it had been 3 years since we had gone on a holiday. Like we had attempts of ones for the last couple of years, but to call them a holiday is kind of stretching reality a little bit, if you know what I mean. So this was the first holiday in a while, and my criteria for this holiday were that the flying was easy, single flight, straight from our local airport and into somewhere that was warm. Didn't have to be very warm, just a pleasant temperature, so it was not likely to be raining, and somewhere that there was a little bit of sunshine and a beach, because I don't swim very much here at home in Ireland. I'm a bit of a wuss. I find the sea just way too cold to try and swim in. Whereas once you've got even slightly warmer climates, if the water's cold, when you come out and you warm up, I just love that. And I actually didn't even realize how much I'd missed the relaxation of being able to walk by the sea, particularly by myself. Because for family holidays, when we used to go in Florida, the kids would often be doing something else, or maybe on the beach or in the water, or their dad might be there with them. And I just walk. I just take off down the beach and I'd walk and I'd walk. And the combination of the heat and the sound of those waves to me is being on holiday. I hadn't realized it until I started walking down that beach, that the combination of the two of those, quiet by myself to think, a long beach to walk on, and the sound of the waves. And it triggered this deep sense of relaxation that I didn't know how much I needed until I got it, but it was really nice. And I suppose as well, kind of tied with that, our kids are getting older. I started designing when I have 4 children, and my youngest is now 16. When he was born, I had just sold to business, and in my head, I decided I was going to become a stay-at-home mother, which in theory sounded like a good idea, and I primarily wanted to be there for them. But the problem is that if you're used to either working or running a business or doing something in combination with children, it can feel like there's a part of, I don't know if it's your brain, your personality, or something that you really need as a person that's not being fulfilled. And it's a very hard thing to pull apart, if you know what I mean, because the pull to be there for your children is so strong, but that this part of you that wants to mind you as an individual and maintain your you-ness, your uniqueness, your personhood, while still being a mother. And because we had our children quite young starting off with, I think that it meant that my personality or my who I was very intrinsically bound up with being a mother. And as the years went on, it meant that it became even more important for me to also have a second reality, or a second part that was just mine. And accidentally, that's what design became. Because I talk about this a lot in class. I give a shorthand and talking about, oh, this is where I started. I learned to knit when I was a child in primary school. Then I sold to business and went on to do this. And so that's kind of the shorthand. But the reality of it was that it was me trying to figure out what I could find that was me, that would be fulfilling, and that would, I suppose, give me something concrete to come out with at the end of the day. So that was kind of why I started knitting again. And I think that the slow ticking over in the back of my head and the realization that I could take something like knitting that I really enjoyed doing, and by putting numbers together, which I had forgotten that I liked, because I do like engineering. I do like the number part of my work. And I'd forgotten that. And suddenly when I actually sat down and started realizing that I could slowly put the two together and build out something totally new for myself that I had built from scratch, was huge. It was really huge to me. And that's where it began. Now, where I'm at now is obviously really, really different. There's all these different layers of the business. There's me as a designer. There's the yarns that I work with. There's the classes that we've started doing. And then there's the community on top of that. And over the last couple of years, like Nadia and Laura have started coming in with me and helping with different aspects of it. And for me personally, while I really enjoy growing the business, same way as I enjoy, well, I can't really take credit for growing the children, raising the children, being part, making sure they don't kill themselves as we go along. Maybe that's a better way of putting it. Making sure my children survived into adulthood. That's what I can claim for being a parent, I suppose. But it's kind of the same thing with the business, is that starting the business was kind of an accidental process, because it started with something I loved. And then as I saw opportunities, I would take them. And before I knew it, it had grown into something that was really bigger than me. And so my job now is actually still to find the part of it that is me, that I want to keep as me and keep going forward. And that has and will always be for me designing. And to a certain extent tied with designing, teaching, which is where the workshops come in, because it's the easiest way for me to convey how to work through a pattern as I'm knitting through it. That like as I'm working on each section, I'm like, okay, let's get the camera, I'll stick the camera on and I'll record that section. And what that means is you get to sit over my shoulder and watch what I'm doing all the way through. And it's the best way I have come across or have found where I can really, I suppose, transmit exactly what I'm doing, because clarity is really important in patterns, but even still, when you're putting words down, words can be misinterpreted. Where if you're sitting with me and watching what I'm doing, it's a little harder to misinterpret it, or like at least there's an extra layer of clarity in there. Because have you noticed that misinterpretation in all straits of life is really, really profound and it happens so easily because we use shorthand or we make assumptions, and maybe we don't want to look stupid and say you don't know what that means, or is this exactly what you mean? But it's something that I am actually trying my best as I work with more and more people to keep myself doing, to I suppose play the devil's advocate, or just say, I think I know what you mean, but let me put down what I believe that you're saying. Is this correct? And it's very interesting because very frequently people use different shorthand than you, or they're making different assumptions, or they're joining dots in a different way. And that's kind of the same thing with patterns, is that I read it in one way and I assume that there isn't any possible way to misinterpret it. But yet you may pick it up and come in with a different set of assumptions or different shorthands, or perhaps even different patterns that you've seen written. And you could read that one sentence in the pattern in a completely different way. So that is, it's an interesting thing to work on. And as I'm working, I'll kind of come to what I'm wearing now. As I'm working through patterns, it is something that has informed how I write my patterns through the years. Because when I began, this is, I think, maybe my third pattern ever. Found it in a box over there, and I thought I would pull it out for you to take a look at. It's still up in Ravelry. The pattern works, but it wouldn't have anywhere near the same level of detail as what I use now. So it's called Line with a Twist, and it is top down, and if you see across here, it's kind of got the bones of some of my early patterns, because my early patterns, I started examining saddle shoulders. So starting in the middle, going out either side, and then doing some short rows going down like this, picking up the body. So it's like a prototype, or the starting point of that. But I was actually so young a designer, that I didn't yet know what I couldn't do. I'd see something, I'm like, let's give it a shot. And I did give the pattern my best shot. But even looking at it now, I know that if I was to rewrite it, the level of detail I would be putting into it would be so much more. And the main reason for that is to avoid confusion, to avoid questions, to make it clear and to have more clarity in the pattern. I'm going to turn around behind here, and I've actually got this on backwards because I had been showing it being worked and then I turned it around. This is actually a pattern I've just recently released. It's called the Hawthorn Sweater, and it's for the knit along that I'm doing this autumn. But the reason I pulled it out is it was one of those ones where I had a particular feature in mind that I had been thinking about for a couple of years, believe it or not, and I'd see it in other sweaters or something similar, and I just loved it, but I couldn't quite wrap my head around how to make it as clear and as foolproof as possible in a pattern. Mainly because I keep trying to do things completely seamlessly. And the answer for me in this particular one was to introduce one seam. So the detail in this that I love is, let me turn it around here, is the fact that the back of the shoulders decrease really, really quickly, and then the front folds over to meet them. And you end up with all of this really interesting kind of crisscross of different stitch patterns here. And then this is the top of, where is it? This is the top of the sleeve, even though this part joins over here. And so it is very straightforward once you just introduce that shoulder seam, because when you're working the back, in order to get that slope, you have to do all those decreases, which means that your shoulder is the section that's decreased. So you have no live stitches, so there's no way to join it seamlessly. And I kept trying to rack my brain. It's like, maybe I could do this. And in the end, I realized that the neatest and the tidiest option was just to put a seam across there. Even though I don't do a lot of seams, it was one of those situations where it simplified the rest of the pattern. So it made sense to have it in there. So the pattern for me was something that I could not have written a couple of years ago. And it wasn't until the details mulled in the back of my head for, I think it was 2 years, maybe even longer. And eventually I kind of came to the realization of the best way of doing it. And then I just sat down and did it. But as I was working through the pattern, I was also doing the videos. And if you're doing the pattern videos as you're working through it, it's a little nerve-wracking, because it means that if you make a mistake, you actually have to go back and redo a big section of the videos because you realize that something wasn't quite right. So it was a little bit nerve-wracking as I was going through. And it was one of those cases where I had a picture in my head. I'm like, I know what it should look like. I know what I want it to look like. The numbers in the spreadsheet make sense. And now I just have to knit it up, which was almost like proof of concept, really. So I'm knitting through it, and it kind of is my happy space because I'm challenging myself because I'm doing something I haven't done before. But yet I've got enough backup of information and the data and the spreadsheet that I've got a fairly secure feeling that it's going to work out the way I expected. And with kind of aiming where you're at with knitting patterns, or where you're with your knitting, or even life in general, really, it's kind of a good place to be where you've got a certain level of security that you know you're not going to fail outright, but that there's still something that's new to you, or a challenge, or scares you a little bit that could still go wrong. And that's what keeps you pushing forward to learn. It's something that I actually end up talking about with my kids quite a lot. A little bit less now that they're older, but particularly when they were heading through the teenage years. And there was a couple of years where new things were really scary, or they were afraid of failing, or they were afraid of doing something wrong. And my mantra actually ended up becoming, for a while, if it doesn't scare you, then it's probably not a challenge. Don't let being scared of something stop you. The worst that'll happen is that you get it wrong, and then you try the next time and you'll improve. So I mean, I've heard of, there's a lot of people that would kind of say, do something that scares you every day. That may be pushing it a bit, because I suspect you would be so stressed out that you'd never relax. But I would actually just take it one step down and say, If something scares you, figure out, is it scary because it's a challenge, or is it scary because it's just a really bad thing to do? If it's scary because it's a challenge and it actually moves you in the direction you want to go in, whether it's learning a new knitting skill or bigger life things, moving you on to things that you've never done before, then I'd suggest go jump and go for it. It's like, we've got one life, one chance to do this. You may as well give it a shot, because the worst that can happen is you get it wrong. So assuming it's not something catastrophic, I would suggest giving it a shot. I think knitting falls into that category. It's a safe place to make mistakes. You can try something out, you can get it wrong, you can rip it, you can try it again. You know, kind of, and if you can actually even take that general attitude into the rest of your life, and if there's things that you can safely experiment with or try or test out in life, in work, in your job, with your kids, with your family, give it a shot, because we're only here once. I suggest we make the most of it. So everyone, go out this week and try something new that maybe scares you a little, but that you've always wanted to do. Just go give it a shot. That's my challenge to you this week. So off you go, and I'll talk to you again in a couple of weeks' time.